Samuel Jenkins was not a man you would notice at first glance. With his graying hair, his threadbare overcoat carefully buttoned to the collar, and his worn leather bag whose handles bore the marks of the years, he seemed to be part of this urban setting that we pass through without paying attention. He looked like a former professor or an old archivist whom time had forgotten, a man you pass in the street without realizing that he carries within him decades of stories, struggles and silences. But Samuel was not empty. He was a living book whose pages had been crumpled by the wind of history, a man shaped by years of effort, toil and dignity won at the cost of contempt. He had seen the no people of color signs, heard the muffled insults in the corridors of businesses, felt the shifty or accusatory glances, suffered the unexpressed but screaming refusals, learned to get up, again and again, quietly, but with a dignity that dug furrows in the soul. That morning, the streets of downtown were buzzing with activity. Well-dressed passers-by, employees in a hurry, conversations full of figures and ambitions.
Samuel advanced slowly, cane in hand, not out of weakness, but out of habit, out of prudence.
He entered the National Bank, a monolith of glass and steel whose facade reflected a world to which he had never been invited. A cathedral of finance, where the carpets were thick, the walls silent, and where eyes often sorted people like one sort's coins, according to their shine. Inside, the temperature was cool, almost clinical. The marble floor returned a discreet echo with every step, and the carefully trimmed plants seemed to be the only living things in this capital sanctuary. The employees, dressed in white shirts and grey suits, glided like shadows, absorbed in their routine, without an ounce of warmth in their eyes. The world here operated according to invisible rules, and Samuel, with his modest demeanor, seemed out of the picture. But he wasn't. His step was slow but sure. He approached the counter, where Thomas was standing, a young employee with a too white shirt and a look too sure of himself. Thomas tapped nervously on the screen of his phone, checking his messages, a smirk floating on his lips. When he looked up at Samuel, it was with that look one reserves for undesirables. In short, condescending, loaded with prejudice.
Hello, sir.
I would like to make a withdrawal. Samuel's voice was calm, composed, polite, almost gentle. But she carried a silent firmness, that of someone who knows who he is, even if no one around him does. Thomas raised an eyebrow, straightened up slightly, and showed a smile that was too wide, too fake. To his left, Rachel, a blonde co-worker with perfectly manicured nails, looked up from her screen and glanced amusedly at the scene. An old gentleman, worn out, with an old bag? For them, it was the image of a man who had no place here. It was almost grotesque to see him in this prestigious place. A withdrawal, huh? Said Thomas, exaggerating his tone as if he were speaking to a child. And you're sure you have an account here? He accompanied his words with a look up and down, sizing up Samuel's modest clothes, the old leather bag that seemed almost laughable in this ultra-modern setting. Rachel giggled discreetly. They believed they were in control of the situation. But Samuel did not flinch. He didn't even frown. He knew. He had seen that look 1,000 times in his life. In the 1960s, when he was trying to open an account. In the 70s, when he wanted to buy his first house. In the 80s, when he ran a successful company that no one would believe was founded by a black man. Yes, he knew that look, and he had learned to let it flow over him like rain on a rock. Yes, I have an account here.
If you want, you can call the manager.
He placed his bag on the counter with almost ceremonial slowness.
Not to provoke.
To anchor. This bag, this old, threadbare leather bag, bore the marks of several decades. He had crossed continents, visited capitals, attended confidential meetings. Inside, there were not just papers. There was the memory of a life. Thomas, who did not imagine for a second that this man could be an important client, exchanged a knowing look with Rachel, as if to say, he's going to see what we're doing. Oh, sure. A withdrawal, sir, he said with a sarcastic tone. I'm going to call the principal. He dialed the internal number without hurrying, still displaying that mocking smile. But when a man in a suit entered a few minutes later, the game suddenly changed. Mr. Lambert, the bank director, entered the hall with a confident step. He was a strict-looking man, with a well-tied tie and gold-rimmed glasses. He embodied power, prestige, until the moment his eyes met those of Samuel Jenkins. It was as if the air had frozen. Mr. Lambert's face fell in a fraction of a second. He turned pale, his jaw tightened, and his attitude changed completely.
Mr. Jenkins.
I didn't know you were here. His voice trembled slightly, betraying an emotion mixed with surprise and apprehension. Please excuse me, I will take care of this immediately. At that moment, Samuel calmly removed a thick envelope from his worn bag, with that measured slowness that imposes silence around you. His gestures, deliberate, were imbued with a quiet solemnity. He placed the envelope on the counter as one would place a truth on a table full of lies. Inside was a check. Not a simple check, but a 7-figure amount, the fruit of years of intelligent investment, patience, silent sacrifice, and a discipline that few men knew how to maintain. He had not inherited this fortune. He had built it, slowly, brick by brick, avoiding the traps of a world that never expected a man like him to be able to understand the rules, much less master them. I have come to withdraw a small sum, he said, in a calm, almost gentle voice. There was no defiance or arrogance in his tone.
Just calm clarity.
To prove to you that appearances can be deceiving. The silence that followed was brutal. Mr. Lambert, still frozen in his upright posture as a model director, approached, his breathing slightly ragged. He opened the envelope carefully, as if it contained a sacred relic. Seeing the amount written on the check, his lips pursed, and a new wrinkle formed between his eyebrows. It was very real. The name written at the top of the check was that of Samuel Jenkins. The same name he had heard, absently, during confidential meetings with headquarters. A name associated with rare discretion and quiet power.
Mr. Jenkins.
I didn't know that you, he stammered, unable to finish his sentence, as if the words themselves were escaping him in a cloud of humiliation. Behind him, the employees who, moments earlier, were still snickering, now stood like statues of shame. Their shifty gazes sought an anchor point on the floor, on the walls, everywhere except on Samuel. Thomas, in particular, seemed to have suddenly aged. His slumped posture betrayed his discomfort, and his pale face hid nothing of the inner storm he was going through. Samuel looked at him for a long time. Not with contempt, not with anger, but with this absolute calm, that of the man who no longer has anything to prove. Never judge a man by his bag or by his appearance, Thomas, he said in a deeper voice. True riches are not always visible to the naked eye, and sometimes they hide in silence, perseverance, or in a worn leather bag. He left a moment of suspended silence, like a pause for each word to take root in the minds. Then he turned to Mr. Lambert and added, without raising his voice, I will keep this sum here. But know that it is not money that has been humiliated today. It's dignity. And your bank will always owe me that. With a calm gesture, he collected his papers, closed his bag carefully, and turned around. The sound of his footsteps resonated in the cold marble of the bank like an echo of conscience for those who had judged him. Outside, the air was soft, almost calming.
The sun, high in the sky, bathed the street in dazzling light.
Samuel got into his old car, a sedan with simple lines, but impeccably maintained. He didn't glance back once. He didn't need it. The message had been received.
In the bank lobby, a heavy silence fell.
The employees stood frozen, as if the world had suddenly changed gravity. The laughter had died down, replaced by brutal introspection. And in Thomas's eyes, a beginning of understanding, painful but necessary, was taking root. The story of Samuel Jenkins is not one of revenge. It is that of a reminder that humility is a strength, that dignity cannot be bought, and that a man's worth is never measured by his clothes or his age, but by his history, his uprightness, and the way he chooses to carry himself, even in the midst of contemptuous looks.